green counteracts red, blah, 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 color wheel. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite things ever, foundation. Who's shocked? But not just foundation, my top full coverage, extreme coverage foundations for acne. These aren't all of my holy grail ride or die foundations. These are just my favorite extreme coverage, gonna cover everything. For those of you who are new here, I do Foundation Friday every single Friday on my channel where I review different foundations. I also do 15 days of foundation, so I'm gonna have all of my foundation playlists linked down below in the description box. But I've tested out over 100 foundations at this point, definitely more than that. Haven't done the math yet. I have cystic acne with combination skin. I have a lot of texture, so I'm always on the hunt for good full coverage foundation. It's not gonna cake up, and that just kind of smooths everything over, hides some of the texture, and that just looks good. You know what I'm saying? I am currently on Accutane. I'm on day 10 today when I'm filming this, so I'm gonna have my acne story video linked right here in the description box down below if you want to hear my whole acne history and everything. You can see what my skin looks like in every single foundation video, but here is also a very recent photo that was taken the same day that video was filmed, just so if you're new here you can see what my skin looks like. Alright, so let's get into it. I'm going to tell you kind of my top 9 foundations. I have a couple honorable mentions and also just some tips and things that I found over the years that helps with covering acne. So like I always say, foundations are one of those things that really are totally dependent on your skin, what kind of skin conditions you're dealing with, if you have dry skin, oily skin, eczema, acne, and also just what you prefer. The coverage, the finish, if you like more matte, if you like more dewy. Some foundations that a lot of people absolutely love and look like full coverage on them are at best medium coverage on me and look super heavy, cakey, and just horrible. So it really just depends on your skin. These are just my top foundations for covering acne when I want that extreme coverage. I don't want to be seeing acne peeking through. I just want my skin to look flawless and good. This is what does it for me. So I'm gonna start out with one that if you watch videos on YouTube at all, you've probably seen someone talking about this at this point. This kind of blew up this year. I have an older review on this, and ever since then, it has been one of my go-to foundations for specific things, which I'll tell you about, but this is the Dermacol Makeup Cover. This is the most extreme coverage foundation I have ever found. So out of all of the ones I'm mentioning, if you want extreme coverage where you have to use the tiniest amount of product, like I'm talking a pea-sized amount, this is amazing. This is a product that I don't use as an everyday foundation, only because on my skin it doesn't last very well throughout the day. This is one that I like using if I'm going to be taking photos, if I'm going to be just at an event or just at something for a few hours where I want my skin to look absolutely flawless. I like using this to mix in with other foundations. On its own, this isn't an everyday foundation for me. I recommend this for any skin type with acne if you use it for that purpose, because you can mix this with foundations to kind of counteract whatever you don't like in this. So say you have super oily skin and this just makes you a grease ball throughout the day, you can mix it with a more oil controlling mattifying foundation and you kind of have the best of both worlds because this adds coverage. The lightest shade is actually 208, so don't get 207 if you're fair. 207 is darker than 208, so I use 208 as the perfect shade match for me. I love it. There are a lot of fakes going around since this product blew up, so just be careful with where you purchase this. This tube, while it looks small, will last friggin' forever because again, you need literally the smallest amount and it covers everything. You do not need concealer with this one. You don't need a spot concealer. This is like blackout extreme coverage right here. On its own for me, the finish of this is actually beautiful. It's very smoothing, it's dewy. I love the way it sits over my texture. It looks great on my forehead. My texture kind of problem areas are usually the center of my forehead, around my nose, and this doesn't accentuate any of my textures, so I do love how it looks on its own. It just doesn't hold up the best on its own for me. By the way, just looking at my list here, most of the foundations I'm going to be mentioning have more of a dewy kind of satin finish because that's personally what I find looks most flattering on my skin with texture and acne. If you have a very matte foundation sitting on top of acne, that can sometimes accentuate it, versus if you have kind of more of a smoothing dewy foundation, your overall skin I find just looks a bit healthier. If you have oily skin, that can be a little bit tricky because dewy foundations typically don't tend to be the most long lasting on oily skin. Just blanket statement there. Of course, there are ones that are. So I find that having a good setting powder can help with that. I'm going to link my go-to powders down below. Powder is another thing to be careful about because if you're putting a heavy powder on top of a heavy foundation, things can get looking real heavy real quick. So it's all about finding the right mix for your skin, which powders sit best on your skin. As I go, I just thought of this. I think I'm going to kind of rank the coverage just so you can get an idea of how they compare. The coverage on Dermacol, I would say, is 10 out of 10. This is the most coverage I think you can find, at least on the market right now from what I've seen. Next up is the Marc Jacobs Remarkable Foundation. Coverage on this I would say is about a 9.5 out of 10, maybe like a 9.25 out of 10 if we're really getting critical. I have the shade 10 Ivory Light and 12 Ivory. 12 Ivory is too dark, 10 Ivory is too light. There's a huge shade jump between these. By the way, I'm going to insert swatches while I'm talking about these foundations so you can see how they compare. I rarely use this foundation on its own because I find that it can just look a little bit heavy on my skin. It is very, very matte. It can kind of cake up around my nose area a bit. So the only way I like using this on its own is with the Smashbox primer water underneath. This really does make a huge difference. I find that it lasts amazing throughout the day. I have slept in this combination before, got a migraine, was sleeping in it, and when I woke up, my face was friggin' still on. Even with laying my friggin' face on a hot pack, this lasted, these two together. If you didn't like this foundation on its own, try it with the primer water. But what I do really love this for is using the shade 10 to mix in to lighten with foundations and add coverage. It is awesome. You need the tiniest drop. I hate the packaging of this. It gets so messy. As you can see, there's a shit ton of foundation around the rim here. It's not even a dropper applicator. It's just like a stick with a ball at the end. So I really don't like the packaging of this. Definitely think it could be improved. You need the tiniest amount of this. It adds amazing coverage to whatever foundation you mix it in with. Definitely mattifies it. So if you're not into matte, you probably wouldn't like this. But if you are into matte foundations and you want something that's gonna cover everything, last really well throughout the day, at least on my skin, this one could be worth the money. It's obviously a bit of a splurge. I mean, it's friggin' Marc Jacobs. As I'm looking in this bag, I'm pretty sure I have videos on every single one of the foundations I'm talking about. So if you ever want to know if I have a specific review on a foundation, all you have to do is search the Tayla and the name of the foundation in the YouTube search bar and it'll come up. So next up is the Laura Geller Cover Lock Cream Foundation. I have the shade Porcelain. This is such a beautiful foundation. If you have texture, this is beautiful for smoothing out your skin. It covers amazing. We're kind of getting into now like the full coverage foundations. Those are the extreme coverage. Now we're going into the full coverage. The rest of them are all full coverage. Hence the title of the video. Just nothing insane. Like I don't think this would cover a tattoo. The Marc Jacobs and Dermacol would definitely cover a tattoo. This will cover acne, but it's not quite as intense. It is pretty rare that I find a foundation that I don't have to mix, that looks great on its own, and that is just beautiful all on its own. That's what this foundation is for me. I tested this out during 15 Days of Foundation a couple series ago. I've been using it ever since. If we're saying the Marc Jacobs is a 9.25 on coverage, I would say this one is probably 9, maybe 8.75. I don't know, man. All of the rest I'm going to talk about are full coverage, so they're all kind of between like an 8.5 and a 9 basically. This gives you a beautiful dewy kind of finish. I almost find it to be kind of plumping. It reminds me a lot of the Milk Makeup Blur Liquid Foundation, which I'm going to talk about. This foundation I'm actually wearing right now mixed with another foundation I'm going to talk about just because I was in the mixing mood, but again, I love this on its own. By the way, I should say the Marc Jacobs Remarkable I probably wouldn't recommend if you have dry skin. If you do, you'll have to majorly prep your skin, maybe mix this in with something more moisturizing. Definitely use a super moisturizing primer underneath. This one I think can work for all skin types. If you have oily skin, you'll definitely have to use a super good oil controlling primer underneath and also a powder. If you have dry skin, you probably would love this because it's very creamy feeling. It's super moisturizing. So the only downside for me with this one is that it doesn't last amazing throughout the day. This one I get a solid 5 hours, 6 hours out of, where it's still looking great and then it kind of goes downhill. So if I need a super long lasting foundation, I probably wouldn't go with this one. I would go with the next one I'm going to talk about. This next one, if you've been watching any of my videos recently, you've probably seen this coming. This is the Milk Makeup Blur Liquid Foundation. Holy shitsies, I'm in love with this. I have multiple videos using this. If you want to know my favorite way to apply this to make this last amazing throughout the day and look friggin' flawless, watch the Makeup for Photos video. I'll link that one down below and in the eye too, but it just looks stunning. This one I really would say is a full coverage blurring foundation. It sits on the skin amazing. This one hides all of my texture. It looks pretty dang similar to the Laura Geller Cover Lock. Probably don't need both of these. If I had to pick one that I could only use for the rest of my life, I would probably pick, I don't know. I think I would go with the Milk Makeup, only because the combination that I show you in that video the Makeup for Photos video just lasts amazing on my skin. Definitely one of the most flawless foundation routines I've found so far, so I think I would go with this one. I don't know if there's some variation with the shades or something, because I've seen other people saying that this is more matte. This is definitely very dewy on my skin. I mean, it's a dewy foundation. I think this one would wear best on probably dry to normal skin. If you have oily skin, like I do, combination skin, you can definitely make this one work and last better. But I think dry to normal, this would be beautiful on. So this foundation is what I reach for 9 out of 10 times if I want full coverage, but I am in a major rush. If I have like 10 minutes to get out the door, but I still want to be looking good and looking like I put some effort in, I'll either go for the Dermacol, because that one is super quick and I can actually use it with just a dry sponge. So it makes application super easy because you don't have to waste time dampening your sponge and all that. And you literally have flawless full coverage in like 30 seconds. But this one, you can get the same effect with. This is the Makeup Forever Ultra HD foundation stick. Okay, I feel like the ranking system is kind of going to shit, because at this point, they're all going to be kind of the same. Of course, it also depends on how much you use and how you apply foundations to get a certain amount of coverage. I typically use a decent amount of product, especially where I have my acne, which is my chin and like lower cheek area. I don't have a lot of acne on my forehead. When I use this, I do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on one side of my face, like 5 little strokes, and blend it out with the Sigma F82, which is just the round top kabuki brush. That's my favorite brush to use with this, or the e.l.f. brush. I'll have both those linked down below next to this foundation in the description box. I use the shade 115. They now make, I think, 2 lighter shades. It is just so quick, full coverage, covers my acne, and it has a really beautiful finish. Again, more on the satin dewy side. This isn't one that I find to be super long lasting. If I have somewhere I have to be where I just want to look put together, but I don't need my foundation to last like 12 hours, I'll use this one. So these ones are technically pigment drops, but I feel like I have to mention these because if you have acne, these are bomb for covering. I use the shade N10. These you can use on their own. You can mix it in with a moisturizer, a primer. You can mix it in with other foundations. I typically wear this either on its own or mixed in with other foundations to add coverage and add a really pretty skin-like finish. Again, these are dewy. This sits beautifully on texture. I do feel like this breaks me out, so I try not to super frequently reach for these for that reason. Just because this breaks me out, it might be totally fine on you, but these are just awesome for adding a shit ton of coverage. What is with this packaging? It gets so messy. I hate the packaging of this. It just like cakes up around the rim right there. But if you like dewy and you're looking for something to mix in with other foundations to add more coverage, maybe even alter the shade, this could be a good option. They do have a ton of shades in that as well. So next up is the Clinique Beyond Perfecting Foundation and Concealer. Beautiful coverage. This again is pretty quick to apply because it has this giant doe foot applicator, so you could just put it on your face and blend out. I really like using a brush with this. Again, the Sigma F82 is bomb. This one is weird because I find that it really depends on the skin day I'm having, how this holds up on my skin. Sometimes it lasts amazing throughout the day. Sometimes it starts to majorly crease around my nose area and look a bit heavy. So I feel like this one is really dependent on the primer you use, how you set it. This is in the lightest shade 0.5 Breeze. If you're any more fair than I am, this will be way too dark because this one is still a bit dark on me and this does oxidize. I don't know what it is, but sometimes I feel like it looks super matte and sometimes it looks more dewy. I think it's really just dependent on the primer I'm wearing that day and everything. This one is just kind of an honorable mention because I believe this only comes in 3 shades. I have a video on this too. This has friggin' bomb coverage. This is like up there almost with Marc Jacobs Remarkable, but this is so friggin' dark. This is the lightest shade, 08 Creamy Glow. Even mixing in, it still looks a bit dark, so it's just hard for me to wear this one, but it has amazing coverage and looks great on the skin, so if you can find a shade that matches you, it might be worth getting a sample of this or trying it out. So next one is another foundation stick that I actually found on Amazon. I believe this was during a 15 Days of Foundation series too, a few series ago. But this is the Joelle foundation stick in soft cream. There's no wording or anything on here besides the shade on the bottom. The shade is a bit dark, but it just looks so nice on the skin. I would say this is more of a satin finish. This reminds me of like an event makeup. If you're going to prom or you have a wedding or something coming up where you just want your skin to look flawless, this one is beautiful. This is the e.l.f. Acne Fighting Foundation. This has salicylic acid, witch hazel, camphor, tea tree oil, and aloe. I wish e.l.f. came out with more shades of this because the shade Porcelain is way too dark. I have to mix this, but this is actually what I'm wearing right now mixed with the Laura Geller Cover Lock, and this always looks beautiful on the skin. It has a little bit less coverage than everything else I'm talking about. This one I would say is probably an 8.5, maybe even like 8.25, but you can definitely build this up. I just love the way this feels on my skin, sits on my skin. It feels pretty lightweight. It doesn't feel like I'm wearing a heavy, super heavy duty full coverage foundation. If I have a foundation that I want to add just a little bit more of like a skin-like look to it and maybe darken it a little bit, I'll go ahead and mix this one in because it just gives it that skin-like nice look to it. I feel like my skin reacts really well to this foundation. Definitely doesn't break me out. I feel like it almost helps my skin a little bit when I wear this. So I have 2 honorable mentions here, and then I have one just in my head because I actually need to repurchase it. The first one that I don't have here is the It Cosmetics CC Illumination. It's actually a CC cream, but it has great coverage. Not super full coverage, but you can build it up to full coverage, especially if you just put a little bit of spot concealer on underneath or over top. It looks beautiful and my skin loves it. I definitely prefer the illumination to the normal CC, but they do make one that isn't illuminating. I just find that one to look a little bit heavy on my skin, but the illumination one looks beautiful on the skin. Almost looks kind of plumping, just makes you look really healthy. I wouldn't say it's completely full coverage, which is why it's an honorable mention, but for example, I would mix that with something like the Marc Jacobs Remarkable, just add a bit of this in. This one is an honorable mention because this is a very recent find. I typically don't like throwing something into a top video unless I've tested it for like weeks and weeks. But this one I do want to mention because it's drugstore, it's easily accessible, and I feel like this is one of the most full coverage foundations I have found from the drugstore so far. This is the CYO Matte Foundation No Shine Zone. This is in the shade 203. It is too dark for me. I actually used this in a recent video if you want to see it in action, but this is a very matte finish, but it doesn't look cakey. It still looks kind of smoothing. It just sits really nicely on the skin. So if you prefer matte, but you still want that coverage and you want something more affordable, this could be a good option for you. CYO is a new brand. They carried it at Walgreens. I'm assuming they're going to expand their shade line since the lightest shade is 203. I feel like they'll come out with a 202 and 201. Maybe we can even get a 200 in there. If you're looking for a drugstore option, this one I would say definitely has more coverage than the e.l.f. Acne Fighting Foundation off of just one layer. And then the last honorable mention is the Catrice HD Liquid Coverage Foundation Drops. This is in the lightest shade 10 Light Beige, too dark again. This I tested in the last 15 Days of Foundation series, but this is just a dropper applicator. These are very matte, but they almost look airbrush. It actually looks pretty similar to this foundation. I prefer this a little bit more actually, just because I feel like it doesn't look quite as heavy. This one I wouldn't say looks heavy on my skin, but this looks even better. But this does have pretty damn good coverage, and Catrice is also drugstore and you can get that at Ulta. So those are my top recommendations for acne, for texture. Now that I've talked about all the products, I kind of want to touch on a couple things just because I know I'm going to get questions about this. Spot concealing and color correcting. Those are 2 things that I get asked about all the time. So spot concealing, I do sometimes. It just kind of depends on the day. I always spot conceal if I'm going out without foundation on, just to cover up my acne. I'll use the Maybelline Instant Age Rewind Concealer. I do find that if you want to use less foundation, spot concealing is a great option. You can spot conceal before or after foundation, but I typically like to do it before, just because then you know kind of how much foundation you have to use on top of it, and if it's a different color than your face, like if it's too light or too dark, when you put your foundation on top of it, you won't be able to tell. I typically only spot conceal if it's a foundation that's more medium coverage. If I'm going to be going in with a full coverage foundation that's going to cover most of my acne, if not all of it, there's no point to add on more product. So for example, if I was going to be using the CYO Long Lasting Foundation or the Estee Lauder Double Wear Nude, something that doesn't have quite full coverage on its own, instead of going in with 2 full layers, these are something that usually I would use spot concealer before, so when I go in with a medium coverage foundation, my face still looks like full coverage. So color correctors I've talked about in the past a while ago, but I am just not a fan of color correctors. Some people will say if you have acne, use green color correctors because green counteracts red, blah, blah, blah. Color wheel. Color correctors are just ridiculous to me because you put something on to counteract a color that you're then going to put concealer on, that you're then going to put foundation on. It's just too many steps. It doesn't make sense. If you have very intense hyperpigmentation or just discoloring or something that you really can't find a foundation to cover it or a concealer to cover it, that is when I can see color correcting helping. But if you don't, and you're just like me and you have redness and acne, to me it's just kind of an unnecessary step. It just is like no, I don't want to go there. That's just my stance on it. If it works for you, do it. So I think that is everything. That's all the foundations. I hope I remembered everything I wanted to say. I feel like this is going to be a hell long video. If you did stick around and you're still here, I love ya. Comment the word sunglasses down below. I just looked and saw sunglasses. If you enjoyed this video and you did find it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. By the way, on my face, so I don't forget, for the description box. And so you guys know, my eyes are all the new BH Studio Pro Ultimate Artistry eyeshadow palette. There's what the shade looks like. I just went in with a random mix of a bunch of shadows in this palette. Lipstick is the Galactic Liquid Lipstick in Spice. My face highlight is the new Hourglass, what's it called? Metallic Strobe Lighting Palette. All of these will be linked down below. Bronzer's the Galactic Bronzer. Blush is BH Cosmetics, the pink peachy one that I used in the first impressions video. Lashes, I actually stacked 2 lashes, which I don't think I've done that in years, but I stacked the BH 203 lashes, which are super short, with the Eylure Accents number 005. These are just like corner lashes, so I just stacked those right in the corner just to add some volume out there because I felt like it looked a little too short and plain. All right, what time is it? I never film when it's dark out. It's 6 o'clock right now and it's already dark, but I love you guys. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.